In the middle of the celebratory dinner, my daughter lifted her wine glass and announced to the 30 or so relatives who were gathered, "Mom is our personal ATM. Order whatever you want from the menu." The restaurant erupted in laughter, and I watched as everyone began pointing out the most expensive items they could find. Maine lobsters, fancy imported French wines, and desserts with names they could barely pronounce. The server was running around like crazy, trying to keep up with all the orders being placed. I just sat there frozen in my seat, while my daughter seemed to be enjoying my public embarrassment like it was the funniest thing ever. Finally, when the head waiter presented the bill on a small silver platter, the total amount hit me like a punch to the gut. $15,000. 30 pairs of eyes were all focused on me, waiting for my reaction. I took a deep breath, calmly grabbed my purse and said with a smile, "I need to use the restroom for a moment." Then I stood up. I walked through the tables with my back straight and headed for the main door, not even glancing back. I hailed a cab and disappeared into the night. What happened after that is something they still talk about with shock and dismay. My name is Layla Dubois. I'm 69 years old, and for most of my life, I worked as an English literature professor at a public high school in Atlanta, Georgia. I wouldn't say I'm wealthy, but I'm definitely not poor. I've been a widow for the past 8 years. My husband, Isaiah, passed away suddenly from a heart attack one Sunday afternoon, while he was watering the plants on our front porch. Everything changed after that, but not in the way you might think. It changed because I became something I never intended to be, the go-to person for every single problem my family had. Valerie is my only daughter. She's 42. She went to school for graphic design, but never really dedicated herself to a career. She always had some excuse. The job market was too competitive. Clients didn't pay enough. She needed better connections. Like any good mother, I always supported her. I paid for her entire college education. I bought her her first professional computer. I even financed 2 of her failed business ventures before they even made it to the 3rd month. When she married Derek Jackson, who is a nice guy, but not very ambitious, I paid for half of the wedding expenses. When they had trouble paying their rent, I helped them out for 6 months straight. And it was always the same story over and over again because that's what mothers do, right? They sacrifice. They give without expecting anything in return. They're the silent support system that never fails. But the truth is, I did expect something. Not money, not gifts, just a little bit of respect. A phone call every now and then that wasn't just to ask for something. A visit that didn't end with Valerie subtly trying to peek into my wallet to see how much cash I had on me. I wanted her to see me as her mother, not as her personal bank account. But over the years I realized that, to Valerie, that's exactly what I was, an ATM with feelings that were easily ignored. It was the burden of always being generous. After Isaiah's death, the pension I received was modest but decent. Combined with the money I'd saved up over decades of work, I had enough to live comfortably. I could have traveled, finally seen Europe like I always dreamed of doing. I could have bought that little house near the beach in Hilton Head, South Carolina, that I once saw and fell in love with. But no, every time I started to save a little money, Valerie would show up with some new crisis. The car broke down, Derek lost his job again, the kids needed money for tuition, and I, as always, would open my purse. It wasn't just Valerie either. My sister, Aisha Wells, also had a habit of calling me right before the end of the month, always using that same sweet, fake tone. "Lena, darling sister, could you lend me a little something? You know how things are." Aisha lived in a bigger house than I did, drove a newer car, and ate out every weekend. But according to her, I was the one who had money to spare. Those loans were never repaid. Not even one of them. After a while, I stopped calling them loans and just accepted them for what they really were, forced gifts. Then there was Rochelle, my cousin. Every time we saw each other at a family gathering, she'd find some way to sidle up to me and whisper some urgent need in my ear. Her son, Malik, needed money for his college applications. She had to pay off a medical bill. Her washing machine broke down. It was always something. And I always ended up opening my purse, pulling out some bills while she hugged me and called me an angel. I remember one Christmas 3 years ago when Valerie hosted dinner at her house. I arrived with gifts for everyone as usual. I had spent weeks trying to find the perfect present for each person. For Valerie, a set of ceramic skillets that she'd mentioned wanting. For Derek, an olive green shirt that I saw in a boutique and thought looked like his style. For the kids, toys that I knew they would love. When it was time to open the gifts, Valerie unwrapped hers, glanced at it for a couple of seconds and said, "Oh, thanks, Mom. I would have rather had the cash so I could buy what I really needed." There was no hug, no kiss, just that sentence that cut me like a cold knife. That night as I drove back home, I cried the entire way. Not because of the money I spent on the gifts, but because I finally understood that, to my daughter, I wasn't a person. I was just a source of funds, a means to an end. Worst of all, I had let things get to that point. Year after year, sacrifice after sacrifice, I had created this monster with my own 2 hands. But that Christmas night wasn't enough to make me change. Not yet. I kept giving. I kept paying. I kept being the silent, reliable family ATM. Until that cursed day arrived. The day at the restaurant. The day everything came crashing down. The day Valerie decided to publicly humiliate me. And I finally decided that enough was truly enough. The trap at the Monarch Room. It all started with a phone call on a Tuesday afternoon. I was in my living room, reading Toni Morrison's Beloved, a book that I'd read countless times, but that always brought me comfort. The phone rang and I saw Valerie's name on the screen. I hesitated for a moment before answering. Lately, every call from her ended with a request for money, but she was my daughter and mothers always answer. "Mom, I have wonderful news," she said in an unusually cheerful voice. "I want to plan a special family dinner to thank you for everything you've done for us over the years. You deserve it." I was silent, trying to process her words. Valerie wanting to thank me without asking for anything in return. Something in my stomach twisted with suspicion, but I immediately felt guilty for doubting my own child. "A dinner?" I asked cautiously. "Yes, Mom. At the Monarch Room, you know, that fancy place downtown. I'll invite the whole family. It'll be beautiful. This Saturday at 8 o'clock. Does that work for you?" I said yes, even though a part of me already knew that this wasn't a celebration. It was a setup. I spent the days leading up to the dinner with a mix of hope and anxiety. I desperately wanted to believe that Valerie finally saw me, that she had matured, that she understood all the sacrifices I had made for her. I bought an ivory-colored dress, simple and elegant. I had my hair professionally done. I even bought a pair of pearl earrings that I'd seen in a store window and never dared to buy, because I was always saving to help someone else. For once, I wanted to feel special. On Saturday, I arrived at the Monarch Room right at 8 o'clock. It was one of those places where the important people of Atlanta went for special occasions. High ceilings, crystal chandeliers, cream-colored tablecloths, and servers in impeccable suits. I had never been there before. When I walked in, a hostess greeted me with a professional smile and led me to the private room that Valerie had reserved. When the doors opened, I froze. There were 30 people in there. 30. Valerie stood next to a long table, wearing an emerald green dress that probably cost more than I made in a month. Derek was standing beside her with a glass of wine in his hand, and that awkward smile he always wore when he knew something was wrong, but didn't dare say anything. I saw Aisha seated near the head of the table with that look of satisfaction in her eyes that she always got when she sensed an opportunity to take advantage of someone. Rochelle was there too, along with her son Malik. And there were more people, cousins I hadn't seen in years, Valerie's neighbors, even some of Derek's friends that I barely knew. "Mom, you made it!" Valerie shouted, walking toward me with open arms. She hugged me, but it was one of those cold, calculated hugs that are given for the benefit of the crowd. "Look how many people came to celebrate you. Everyone is here because of you." I felt a knot in my throat. This didn't feel like a celebration. Felt like an ambush. But I was already there. 30 pairs of eyes were watching me, so I smiled and greeted everyone. Although my hands were shaking slightly, they seated me in the center of the main table in a chair that resembled a small throne. Valerie stood up and tapped her glass with a knife to get everyone's attention. The room went silent. "I want to make a toast," she began, and my heart swelled for a second with the hope that maybe, just maybe, this was real. To my mother, Lena Dubois, the woman who has always been there, the one who never says no, the one who always has open hands to help us. Up until that point, everything sounded fine. People started applauding. I felt tears welling up in my eyes. But then Valerie continued, and with every word, my hope crumbled. Because let's be honest, she said with a laugh that cut through me like broken glass. Mom is our personal ATM. And tonight we're going to enjoy it. Order whatever you want from the menu. It's all on her. The room erupted in cheers and applause. I watched as everyone eagerly grabbed their menus. Aisha practically lunged for hers, pointing to the most expensive dishes with her finger. Rochelle imperiously called the waiter over and started ordering without even looking at me. Malik ordered a $300 bottle of top-shelf bourbon. People I didn't even know started ordering lobster, imported cuts of meat, French wine, appetizers, main courses, desserts. The chaos was complete. I sat there frozen, my hands resting in my lap. The ivory dress that had made me feel special now felt like a ridiculous costume. The pearl earrings weighed on me like stones. I wanted to get up. I wanted to scream. I wanted to ask Valerie how she dared to humiliate me like that. But I couldn't. 30 people were there. The restaurant was full. I felt like if I opened my mouth, all that would come out was a ragged, tearing sob. Valerie sat down next to me, still chuckling. She put a hand on my shoulder and whispered in my ear. Don't be mad, Mom. Just a joke. Besides, you've always wanted the family to be together, right? Well, here we all are, thanks to you. Her breath smelled of expensive wine. Her words were poison disguised as sweetness. The servers began bringing out the plates, one after another. Mountains of food. Bottles that were emptied and immediately replaced. People laughed, talked, and took photos. No one was really looking at me. I was just the excuse for this feast, the source of money that made everyone else's fun possible. At one point, Aisha raised her glass toward me and yelled, "To Lena, the most generous." Everyone toasted, and I smiled a smile that hurt worse than any physical blow. The escape. 2 hours passed. 2 eternal hours. Finally, the head waiter approached with the silver platter. Folded carefully on top of it was the bill. He placed it in front of me with a professional bow. I unfolded the paper with trembling hands. My eyes scanned the endless list of dishes, drinks, suggested gratuities, and at the bottom, in large, clear numbers, $15,000. That was more than half of my annual savings. That was the trip to Europe I never took. That was the beach house I never bought. That was my dignity converted into figures. 30 pairs of eyes were fixed on me. Valerie watched with that confident smile of someone who always gets what they want. Aisha raised her eyebrows, waiting. Rochelle was already taking out her phone to snap a photo. And in that moment, I felt something I had never felt before. It wasn't sadness. It wasn't disappointment. It was clarity. A cold, sharp clarity like a surgeon's scalpel. I finally saw the truth. And the truth was, if I didn't save myself right then and there, no one else would. So I took a deep breath, folded the bill neatly, set it on the table, picked up my purse, stood up with all the dignity I had left, and said in a soft but firm voice, "I'm going to the restroom for a moment." And I started walking. I walked between the tables with my back straight and my head held high. Every step took me farther away from those 30 people who had used me for years. I could feel their eyes on me, but none of them suspected a thing. Why would they? I had always been compliant, always paid, always smiled, and always accepted my role as the family ATM. They had no reason to think that this time would be any different. I passed the waiter who had served us all night. He smiled at me with professional courtesy. I crossed the main dining room where other families were eating peacefully, oblivious to the drama unfolding in the private room. I reached the hallway that led to the restrooms and kept going. My legs moved on their own, guided by a survival instinct I didn't know I possessed. I reached the reception desk. The hostess, who had greeted me when I arrived, was distracted by her computer. She didn't see me walk by. I pushed open the glass door, and the cool night air hit my face. It was April, and the breeze still had that pleasant coolness. I took a deep breath for the first time in hours. My lungs filled with clean air. Air that wasn't tainted by the cruel laughter of my family. I looked around. The street was lit by antique lamps. A few taxis were waiting on the corner. And in that moment I made the most important decision of my life. I walked toward the first cab. The driver, an older gentleman with a gray mustache, looked at me kindly. "Where to, ma'am?" he asked. "The Greyhound bus terminal," I replied without hesitation. My voice sounded strange, as if it belonged to someone else. A braver person, a person who had finally woken up. During the ride I pulled my cell phone out of my purse. I had 3 messages from Valerie. The first said, "Mom, where are you? The waiter is asking for you." The second, "Mom, this isn't funny. Come back." The third, "Mom, answer the phone." I turned off the phone. The silence that followed was the most beautiful sound I had heard in years. We arrived at the terminal. I paid the driver with a $20 bill and told him to keep the change. I went inside the building. The terminal was almost empty at that hour. Only a few lonely travelers were waiting on the plastic benches. I walked up to the ticket counter. A young woman in a green uniform greeted me with a tired smile. "Where are you traveling to?" she asked. I thought for a moment. I needed to go somewhere where I could think, where I could breathe, where no one knew me. I remembered Diane, my childhood friend. We had met in elementary school more than 50 years ago. She had moved to Charlotte, North Carolina after getting married, but we had always stayed in touch. Sporadic calls, Christmas cards. She was one of the few people in my life who had never asked me for anything, who called just to see how I was doing, who remembered my birthday without any ulterior motives. "Charlotte," I told the woman at the counter. "The next bus leaves in 40 minutes, she replied. "Perfect," I said and bought the ticket. $25, a ridiculously low price compared to the $15,000 that my family expected me to pay that night. I sat down on one of the benches to wait. The ivory dress that I had bought with such excitement now felt like a shroud. I took off the pearl earrings and put them in my purse. I loosened my hair, which I had styled so carefully. And for the first time all night I allowed myself to feel the rage, to feel the humiliation, to feel the pain of having been betrayed by the person I loved most in the world. But I also felt something else, something I hadn't expected. I felt relief, an immense relief, like taking off shoes that had been hurting my feet for hours. I realized that I had been carrying an invisible weight for years. The weight of expectations, the weight of being everyone's savior, the weight of being unable to say no. And in that moment, sitting on a plastic bench in a bus terminal, with a wrinkled dress and smudged makeup, I finally let that weight drop. I thought about Valerie, about how I had raised her after Isaiah's death. All the nights I stayed up working to pay for her college, all the sacrifices I had made so that she could have a better life than I did. And I wondered, when everything had gone so wrong, when had my generosity become her entitlement? When did I stop being her mother and become her resource? The answer was painful but clear. I had allowed it to happen. Every time I said yes when I wanted to say no. Every time I opened my purse when I should have closed it. Every time I swallowed my pride and accepted being treated as less than human. I had built that monster. And now I had finally made the decision to leave it behind. The silence of the phone. The loudspeaker announced the departure of the bus to Charlotte. I stood up, smoothed out my dress, and walked toward the platform. The bus was old but clean. I got on and found my seat, number 14, next to the window. I sat down and leaned my head against the cool glass. The engine roared and we began to move. Atlanta, with all of its painful memories, began to fade behind me. I looked out the window. The city lights flickered in the darkness like fallen stars. I thought about Valerie receiving the news that I wasn't coming back. I thought about her panic when the waiter told her that someone had to pay that $15,000. I thought about Aisha and Rochelle scrambling for excuses to get out of paying. I thought about the chaos, the confusion, the accusations, and I felt no guilt. I felt no remorse. I only felt a strange and liberating peace. I took my cell phone out of my purse. It was still off. I turned it on for a moment just to do one thing. I opened my contacts and looked up Diane's number. I wrote a short message. Diane, it's Lena. I'm heading to Charlotte. Can I stay with you for a few days? It's urgent. I sent the message and immediately turned the phone off again before Valerie's desperate calls and messages could start flooding in. The bus sped down the dark highway. Some passengers were sleeping. Others were looking at their phones. I simply watched the night pass. And for the first time in the 8 years since Isaiah's death, I felt like I was taking control of my own life. I didn't know what would happen next. I didn't know how Valerie would react. I didn't know if we could ever repair our relationship. But in that moment on that bus taking me away from everything I knew that I had done the right thing. Because sometimes loving your family means pulling away from them. Sometimes the only way to save yourself is to disappear. And sometimes the bravest act isn't staying and enduring. It's standing up and walking out the door without looking back. The bus sliced through the darkness of the highway as I tried to process everything I had just done. My hands were still shaking slightly, not from fear, but from adrenaline. It was as if my body was finally reacting to years of silent abuse. I looked at my reflection in the window. A 69-year-old woman with smudged makeup and messy hair stared back. But there was something new in her eyes. Something I hadn't seen in a long time: determination. The trip to Charlotte would take approximately 3 hours, 3 hours to think, 3 hours to fully grasp what I had left behind. I closed my eyes, and inevitably my mind went back to the restaurant. I could picture the scene with painful clarity. Valerie probably waited 5 minutes before starting to worry. Then 10, then 15. Eventually, she would have sent Derek to check the ladies' room for me. He would have knocked on the door, calling my name uncertainly. Nothing. Then they would have asked a waitress to check, and the waitress would have returned empty-handed and confused. I could see Valerie rising from her chair in that emerald green dress, a dress I likely helped pay for, walking through the entire restaurant, looking for me, checking every corner, asking the servers. And finally, as the terrible truth began to sink into her brain, panic would set in, because the bill was still there, $15,000 that someone had to pay, and the ATM had vanished. I wondered how long it would have taken them to call the manager. I imagined the uncomfortable conversation. Valerie probably tried to use her charm, that sweet smile that always worked on me, but that held no power over strangers. The manager, a professional who had seen all sorts of situations in his restaurant, probably explained calmly but firmly that someone had to pay, that they couldn't just leave, and that if necessary he would call the police. The police? That word must have hit Valerie like a bucket of ice water. 30 people watching her. 30 witnesses to her embarrassment. The very embarrassment she had inflicted on me. The irony was so perfect it almost made me smile in the darkness of the bus. What would she have done then? She likely tried to call me once, twice, 10 times, but my phone was off. Dead to the world, dead to her. Then would come the desperation. She would call Aisha, begging her to pay at least part of it. But Aisha, my sister, who always had excuses for not repaying loans, surely found 1,000 reasons not to help. I don't have my wallet. My card is blocked. My husband handles the money. The excuses would flow like water. Rochelle would have done the same. And Malik, and all the other relatives who had eaten and drunk as if the world were ending tomorrow. Suddenly all those people who called me generous, who toasted me, who celebrated it was as if their so-called goodness would become ghosts, vanishing like smoke. It's easy to love an ATM when it's spitting out cash, but when it refuses to cooperate, that love disappears quickly. The bus paused briefly at a gas station, where a few passengers got out to stretch or grab a bite. I stayed put, not feeling hungry or thirsty, just lost in my own thoughts. Through the window I saw a young family, a father, a mother, and their little girl. The girl was happily eating ice cream and laughing. Her parents watched her with genuine, unconditional love. A love without any hidden costs. And it struck a nerve, making me feel incredibly sad about what Valerie and I had lost. There was a time when our relationship was completely different, when she would hug me simply because she wanted to. She'd say, "I love you, Mom," without expecting anything in return. Back then I was her hero, not her personal bank. Where did that little girl go? When did my daughter become this cruel, calculating woman who publicly humiliated me? The answer, as always, made me uncomfortable. I had played a part in that transformation. Every time I gave her money without teaching her the value of hard work. Every time I solved her problems instead of letting her learn from the consequences of her choices. Every time I rescued her when I should have let her fall so she could learn to pick herself up. I had been a loving mother, yes, but I had also been a weak one, and that weakness had created a monster. The bus started moving again. I checked the time on the station clock. Almost 11 p.m. By now, the situation at the restaurant would have reached its peak. Valerie would have been forced to face reality. Someone had to pay the bill, and that someone was her. I imagined Derek frantically pulling out all his credit cards, calculating their limits, trying to scrape together the $15,000 across multiple cards, sweating, shaking, cursing the day he married my daughter. And then the shame would kick in. 30 people witnessing the event organizer being unable to pay the bill, the waiter getting impatient, the manager standing there with his arms crossed. Some relatives would have already started making excuses to leave. I have to be up early for work tomorrow. The kid has school. It's getting late. One by one they would abandon ship because that's how it often goes. People stick around when things are good, but they disappear when the going gets tough. I thought about Aisha, my sister, who was always bragging about her big house and perfect life, but never had the money to repay my loans. She would have been one of the first to bolt. She probably slipped out the back door to avoid being seen. And Rochelle with her son Malik would have done the same. All those freeloaders who had been feeding off my generosity for years would scatter like cockroaches when you flip on the light. The image gave me a twisted sense of satisfaction. It wasn't exactly revenge, it was justice. The universe was finally balancing the scales. For years I had been the one who paid, the one who solved problems, the one who carried everyone else's burdens. Now, for once, they would have to deal with the consequences of their own actions. I glanced at my phone for just a moment. I needed to see if Diane had replied. And there her message was, like a beacon of light in the middle of the storm. Lena, of course you can stay. Are you okay? You'll be here in about 2 more hours. My house is your house. I'm always here for you. My eyes filled with tears, tears of relief, tears of gratitude. In the midst of all the darkness, there was at least one person offering me refuge without asking how much money I had. Before turning off my phone again, I saw the notifications: 53 missed calls from Valerie, 28 messages, 7 calls from Aisha, 4 from Rochelle, and even 3 from unknown numbers, probably more relatives desperately trying to reach me. I didn't open any messages or listen to any voicemails. I just turned off the phone and stashed it deep in my purse. The bus continued on its route. Some passengers were sound asleep, while others watched movies on their phones with headphones. I just watched the darkness go by. With every mile that took me farther from Atlanta, I felt like I was breathing easier, like I had been underwater for years and was finally coming up for air. I thought about what was next. I would have to face the fallout from what I had done. Valerie wouldn't give up easily. She would try to manipulate me. She would use guilt trips, emotional blackmail, all the tactics she had perfected over the years. She would call, crying, saying I had abandoned her, that I was a terrible mother, and how could I do this to her after everything we had been through together? But I was ready, or at least I wanted to believe I was, because this time would be different. This time I wouldn't give in. This time my answer would be a clear, firm, definitive no. The no I should have said years ago. The no that would have saved me so much pain. The no that would finally give me back my dignity. A new beginning awaited me in Charlotte. The bus started to slow down. A sign on the highway indicated that we were approaching the city. My heart began to beat faster. Not from fear but from anticipation. I was about to start a new chapter in my life. A chapter where I wouldn't be anyone's ATM, where I would choose who to help and who not to help, where my worth wouldn't be based on how much money I could give but on who I was as a person. The city lights appeared on the horizon. Charlotte. A city I barely knew but that now represented my freedom, my escape, my rebirth. The bus pulled into the Charlotte terminal at 11:30 p.m. The city was quieter than Atlanta. with a colonial vibe that you could feel even in the bus station. I stepped off the bus with my purse over my shoulder, feeling the weight of the night but also a strange lightness in my chest. It was as if I had left behind not only my family but also years of invisible chains. Diane was waiting for me at the main entrance. I recognized her instantly even after all these years. She still had that short silver hair and those warm brown eyes. When she spotted me, she ran toward me and hugged me without saying a word. That hug was different from any I had received in years. There were no hidden expectations, no ulterior motives, just genuine love from someone who cared about me without wanting anything in return. "You don't have to explain anything right now," she whispered in my ear as she held me close. "First, let's go home. You need to rest." I nodded, unable to speak, because I knew that if I opened my mouth, I would start crying uncontrollably. We walked to her car, a modest but well-maintained gray sedan. During the drive to her house, Diane played soft music and didn't ask any prying questions. She just held my hand in a quiet show of support. Her house was small but cozy, with peach-colored walls, plants in every corner, and family photos that showed a simple but happy life. She showed me the guest room. A room with a single bed, lavender curtains, and a window that looked out onto a small garden. "Stay as long as you need to," she said. "This is your home now." That night, I slept soundly for the first time in months, maybe even years. I didn't dream about Valerie or the restaurant or the $15,000 bill. I dreamed of the sea with calm waves and white sand. I dreamed of peace. I woke up the next day with sunlight streaming through the window. It was almost 10 a.m. It had been years since I had slept that late. I always woke up early, conditioned by decades of work, and the constant anxiety of having to solve everyone's problems. But that morning in Diane's house, I simply rested. I got up, showered, and put on some clean clothes that Diane had left on a chair. They were a little big but comfortable. I went down to the kitchen, following the smell of freshly brewed coffee. Diane was making breakfast: scrambled eggs, hash browns, and hot biscuits. Simple food but made with love. "Did you sleep well?" she asked with a smile. "Better than I have in years," I replied honestly. We sat down to eat, and I finally told her everything. I told her about Valerie and how I had become her personal ATM. I told her about Aisha and Rochelle and all the freeloaders who had sucked the life out of me for years. I recounted in detail the humiliation at the restaurant, the $15,000 bill, and my silent escape. Diane listened without interrupting. When I was finished, she just shook her head and said, "You did the right thing, Lena. Sometimes walking away is the only act of self-love we have left." Her words freed me from the last bit of guilt I was still carrying. After breakfast, I turned on my phone. It was time to face the storm I had left behind. The notifications exploded like fireworks. 122 missed calls, 87 messages. The voicemail was full. I took a deep breath and started reading. Valerie's first messages were confused. "Mom, where are you? Mom, this isn't funny. The waiter is waiting." Then came the panic. "Mom, please answer. I can't pay this. Where are you?" And finally the pure rage. "You're a selfish jerk. You abandoned us. What kind of mother does this?" I read every message with a calmness that surprised even me. The words that would have devastated me before now simply bounced off a shield I didn't know I possessed. Valerie was calling me selfish for not paying a $15,000 bill that she had deliberately run up to humiliate me. The irony was almost comical. There were messages from Aisha too. "Lena, Valerie told me what happened. I can't believe you left us like that. Family is sacred." How easy it is to preach about how sacred family is when you're not the one footing all the bills, when you're not the one sacrificing your dreams for the whims of others. Rochelle had only written once, "I didn't think you were capable of something like that. What a disappointment." I deleted the message without replying. I didn't owe anyone an explanation. But there was another message that surprised me. It was from Derek, Valerie's husband. "Lena, I know I have no right to ask you for anything, but Valerie is devastated. We had to pay the bill with 4 different credit cards. Now we have a $15,000 debt plus interest. I don't know how we're going to get out of this. She won't stop crying. She says you ruined her life. Please at least call her. I read that message 3 times and each time I felt less sympathy. Valerie said I had ruined her life, me, the mother who had sacrificed everything for her, the one who paid for her education, her failures, her every whim, the one who never said no until there was nothing left of myself. And now I was the villain of the story. Diane sat next to me and saw my expression. Are you going to respond? She asked. I thought about it for a long time. Part of me wanted to write a long message explaining everything, defending myself, justifying my actions, but then I realized I didn't need to. My actions spoke for themselves. Finally, I wrote a single message and sent it to Valerie. I spent my entire life being your ATM. I financed your studies, your failures, and your whims. I gave you everything I had, and the only thing I got in return was humiliation. That night at the restaurant, you called me an ATM in front of 30 people. You used me. You ridiculed me. You expected me to pay $15,000 as if my money had no value, as if I had no dignity. Well, the ATM is out of order. I will not give you another cent. The debt you have is yours, not mine. The consequences of your actions are yours, not mine. Learn to live with them. Do not contact me again. I sent the message and blocked her number immediately. Then I blocked Aisha, Rochelle, and all the other leeches who had been draining my energy and money for years. One by one, I erased them from my life with a simple swipe. And with each block, I felt like I was breathing easier. Diane hugged me. I'm proud of you, she said. And those words meant more than anything Valerie had ever said to me. Planting seeds of dignity. The following days were strange but liberating. Valerie tried calling me from other numbers. She asked friends and acquaintances to contact me. I even got a message from an unknown number claiming to be a lawyer threatening to sue me for abandonment. I just laughed. There was no law that required me to pay the debts of my adult daughter. Meanwhile, my life in Charlotte began to take shape. Diane introduced me to her friends at the book club, women my age, some widows like me, others divorced, all with stories of liberation and rebirth. We met twice a week to discuss books, drink coffee, and share our lives without judgment. One afternoon, Diane took me to a painting workshop. I had never painted in my life. I had always wanted to, but I never had the time, or rather, I never allowed myself to take that time. That day, I painted a sunset over the sea. The colors were a little chaotic and uneven, but it was mine. It was my creation, and no one could take it away from me. I also started taking morning walks in the park near Diane's house. There was a small botanical garden with all kinds of plants. I spent hours there reading the plaques with the scientific names, learning about flowers I had never seen. It was like rediscovering the world. One morning, while watering the plants in Diane's garden, I got a message from a number I hadn't blocked. It was from a distant cousin named Avery, someone I barely knew. Lena, I just wanted to say that everyone in the family is talking about what happened. Some say you did wrong, but I think you did the right thing. Valerie was always a user. It was time for someone to set boundaries. I hope you're doing well. Take care. That message made me cry, not from sadness but from validation, because it meant that at least one person in that family circus understood. At least one person saw the truth behind the facade. I replied with a simple, "Thank you, Avery. I am better than ever." And it was true. For the first time in decades, I was living for myself without guilt, without obligation, without the burden of being everyone's savior. I was free. 3 weeks had passed since that night at the restaurant, 3 weeks in which I slowly began to rebuild myself. Diane told me I could stay as long as I needed, and I gratefully accepted. Every morning I woke up in that room with the lavender curtains and felt like I was living a life I didn't know I could have. A life where my decisions were mine, where my money was mine, where my peace was mine. I signed up for more classes besides painting. Now I was taking a ceramics workshop on Tuesdays and Thursdays. My hands, which for years had only served to open my purse and hand out money, were now creating things. Imperfect mugs, crooked plates, small sculptures that had no commercial value but were treasures to me because they were proof that I could still learn, that I could still grow, that my life hadn't ended at 69. It was just truly beginning. One afternoon while working on a clay pot at the workshop, I met a man named Marcus. He was 72, a widower like me, and he had the hands of an artist. He made clay figures with a precision that I admired. We started talking about techniques, about clay, about how therapeutic it was to create something with your hands. Eventually, our conversations went beyond the workshop. We shared coffee after class and walked through the botanical garden together. It wasn't romance, at least not yet. It was something more valuable. Genuine friendship. Marcus told me that his wife had died of cancer 5 years ago, that his children lived in different states and visited him once a year if he was lucky, and that he had learned to enjoy his solitude instead of being miserable. Solitude and peace are sisters, he told me one afternoon as we looked at the flowers in the garden. When you learn to be alone without feeling lonely, that's when you find true freedom. His words resonated deeply with me because that was exactly what I was learning. To be alone without feeling lonely, to enjoy my own company, and to not need the constant validation of a family that never truly appreciated me. The domino effect. Meanwhile, the news coming from Atlanta painted a very different picture. Avery, my distant cousin, who had become my only contact with the world I'd left behind, kept me in the loop. He told me that Valerie had had to sell her car to pay off part of the credit card debt, that Derek had taken a second job at a gas station to help with the payments, and that their marriage was on the rocks because he blamed her for the situation, and she blamed him for not having enough money. He also said that Valerie had tried to organize a family meeting to trash talk me and make me the family's official villain, but the meeting had been a disaster. Aisha didn't go because she was dealing with financial problems of her own, the kind I had always taken care of, and nobody else wanted to step up. Rochelle didn't show up either, probably ashamed of having been at that disastrous dinner. Of the 30 people who had enjoyed lobster and expensive wine that night, only 5 showed up to Valerie's meeting, and those 5 spent the afternoon listening to her complain without offering any real solutions. The family was falling apart, but not because of my absence. It was falling apart because I had been the artificial glue holding together people who couldn't stand each other. Without my money, without my constant favors, without my endless willingness to solve their problems, everyone was realizing they had nothing in common, that their only bond was their shared ability to take advantage of me. Avery told me all of this with a mix of amusement and sadness. It's like watching a building collapse, he said over the phone. A building that was always poorly constructed, but nobody wanted to admit it was about to fall. He was right. And although part of me felt a little sad about the collapse of my family, a bigger part of me felt relieved because it meant I had finally broken free. One Saturday morning, Diane brought up something I hadn't expected. Lena, I've been thinking. You need to make a decision about your future. Are you going to stay in Charlotte? Are you going back to Atlanta? Because if you stay, you need your own place. You can't live with me forever, even though I'd love for you to. She was right. I had been in a kind of limbo, living day by day without really thinking about the future. That afternoon, I sat in Diane's garden with a notebook and a pen. I made 2 columns. In one I wrote reasons to go back to Atlanta. In the other, reasons to stay in Charlotte. The first column remained completely empty. There wasn't a single good reason to go back. My house there was full of painful memories. Valerie was still there, probably plotting how to manipulate me again. Aisha, Rochelle, all the freeloaders were still there, ready to suck what little was left of me dry. The second column, however, filled up quickly. Peace, new and genuine friends, opportunities for growth, distance from toxic people, Diane, Marcus, the ceramics workshop, the botanical garden, a life that was finally mine. I made my decision that same day. I would stay in Charlotte. I would sell my house in Atlanta and buy something small here, something modest but mine, a place where I could plant flowers and paint sunsets and make clay pots without anyone interrupting me to ask for money. I told Diane my decision, and she hugged me with tears in her eyes. I'm so happy, she said. Charlotte has given you your life back. And she was right. This place, this city I had barely known 3 weeks earlier, had given me something my own family never could. The freedom to be myself. I hired a lawyer in Atlanta to handle the sale of my house. I gave him clear instructions. I wanted no direct contact with anyone in my family. Everything would go through him. Valerie tried to interfere, of course. She called the lawyer crying, claiming the house was her inheritance and that I had no right to sell it. But the lawyer, a professional and direct man, explained that the house was in my name, that I had every legal right to sell it, and that her opinions were irrelevant. The house sold in less than a month. I received $325,000. It wasn't a fortune, but it was more than enough to buy something small in Charlotte and live comfortably on my pension. Valerie sent me a message from a new number that I hadn't blocked yet. You could at least give me part of that money. I'm your daughter. I needed it to pay the debts you caused. I let out a bitter laugh. The debts I caused. How convenient it was to rewrite history. How easy it was to blame me for a dinner she organized, a humiliation she orchestrated, and a bill she deliberately created. I blocked that number too and moved on. The Queen Elizabeth rose. With the money from the sale, I bought a small house on the outskirts of Charlotte. It had 2 bedrooms, a large kitchen with east-facing windows to catch the morning sun, and most importantly, a garden. It wasn't large, maybe 250 square feet, but it was perfect, fertile ground where I could finally plant something of my own. The day I moved in, Diane, Marcus, and the friends from the book club came to help me. Together, we carried my few belongings, cleaned the house, and hung the light yellow curtains I had picked out myself. When we were done, we sat in the garden drinking homemade lemonade. The sun was setting slowly, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. And in that moment, surrounded by people who appreciated me for who I was and not for what I could give them, I felt something I hadn't felt in decades. Pure happiness. To Lena, Diane said, raising her glass. To her courage, to her new life. Everyone cheered. And I, with tears streaming down my face, toasted myself. To the woman who had finally mustered the courage to save herself. That night, alone in my new house, I stood in the garden beneath a canopy of stars. The earth carried a scent of possibility, like a promise of new beginnings. I mused about planting roses, tomatoes, and various herbs, contemplating filling that empty space with vibrant life. And then it struck me. That's precisely what I was doing with my own existence, wasn't it? Filling the void that years of abuse and exploitation had carved out. I was planting seeds of peace, dignity, and most importantly, self-love. The old ATM, as it were, had been destroyed. And in its place, a free woman had at long last been born. The months floated by like pages in a book that was finally reaching its happy ending. Summer blanketed Charlotte with its balmy afternoons and refreshingly cool evenings. Under my care, my garden began to undergo a beautiful transformation. I planted coral-colored roses in one corner, nestled herbs near the kitchen, and in the center, a small lemon tree that Marcus was kind enough to help me plant. Every morning, without fail, I ventured out with my coffee to observe the progress. Each new leaf that unfurled, every bud that swelled, every flower that opened was a quiet, personal victory over the ghosts of my past. My life had settled into a peaceful, yet deeply satisfying rhythm. Mondays and Wednesdays were dedicated to the painting workshop. Tuesdays and Thursdays, I immersed myself in ceramics. Fridays were reserved for book club meetings, which alternated between Diane's house and mine. And on weekends, I loved exploring Charlotte with Marcus. We'd visit small, often overlooked museums, stroll through the historic downtown area, and linger in cozy old coffee shops, engaging in lively conversations about books, art, and the very essence of life itself. Slowly, organically, and without any pressure, our friendship began to evolve into something far deeper. It wasn't the fiery, impetuous love of youth, no. It was something far more profound. A chosen companionship, a bedrock of mutual respect, a tenderness that didn't require any words at all to exist. The unexpected apology. As my life blossomed, the news filtering in from Atlanta painted a starkly different picture. Avery kept me in the loop, though I had specifically asked him to only relay the essentials. I didn't want to become consumed by the life I had left behind, but some stories were simply too compelling to ignore. Valerie had lost her job. The design firm where she worked part-time had officially let her go, citing staff cuts. But Avery told me the real reason. The restaurant scandal had reached the ears of her boss. Someone had shared the story on social media, and it had swiftly gone viral within the local community. The woman who humiliated her own mother, and then stuck her with a $15,000 bill, was the headline that was making the rounds. Valerie tried to deny the story, but there were simply too many witnesses. 30 people had been there that night. And in this day and age of social media, secrets simply don't exist. Her marriage to Derek finally crumbled. He grew weary of juggling 2 jobs just to pay off a debt that she had created. He grew exhausted of her tantrums, her projected guilt, and her utter inability to take responsibility for her own actions. One night, he simply packed his belongings and left. Valerie was left stranded in an apartment she could no longer afford, burdened by debts that seemed to grow larger every month, and without her personal ATM to come to her rescue. She desperately tried to secure loans from other relatives. She called Aisha, who promptly hung up on her. She called Rel, who claimed to have financial problems of her own. She called aunts, cousins, acquaintances, anyone she thought might lend a hand. But no one wanted to help her because everyone had already heard the story. Everyone knew precisely what she had done, and no one wanted to become the next ATM. Aisha, my sister, wasn't faring much better either. Without my constant infusions of cash, she was forced to confront the harsh reality that she lived far beyond her means. She had to sell her newer car and relocate to a smaller, less extravagant house. Her husband, who had enjoyed the money I indirectly funneled their way for years, now blamed her for ruining her relationship with me. The arguments were incessant. The perfect marriage she had always boasted about turned out to be just as phony as everything else. Rochelle had vanished from the family radar. After the restaurant scandal, she distanced herself from everyone, likely ashamed of having participated in that very public humiliation, or perhaps simply because there were no more resources to be extracted. Parasites always disappear once the host stops feeding them. Hearing these stories stirred up conflicting emotions within me. On one hand, there was a part of me that felt a dark, undeniable satisfaction, seeing that everyone was finally facing the consequences of their actions, that the universe was finally collecting the bill that they had been charging to my account for years. But on the other hand, there was a deep undercurrent of sadness because these people were, after all, my family. Because Valerie, despite everything, was still my daughter. And a part of me, that maternal instinct that never fully dies, couldn't help but wonder if I had been too harsh, if I should have sought a different path to setting boundaries. One night, while having dinner with Diane and Marcus at my house, I voiced these doubts. Sometimes I wonder if I did the right thing, I said as I served the pasta I had cooked. Valerie is destroyed. Her life is a complete mess, and I'm her mother. Shouldn't I be there to help her? Diane looked at me with that kind of wisdom that only comes with age and experience. Lena, there's a huge difference between helping and enabling. For decades you helped her. You paid for everything, solved everything, forgave everything. And what did she learn from that? Nothing. She only learned that she could use you without facing any consequences. What she's experiencing now isn't punishment, it's education. Life is finally teaching her the lessons you could never impart because you always shielded her from the consequences of her own decisions. Marcus nodded in agreement. Kids need to fall down in order to learn how to get back up. You never let her fall. Now she's falling. Yes, it hurts, but she's also learning. And maybe, just maybe, this fall will ultimately turn her into a better person. Or maybe not. But that's no longer your responsibility to carry. Their words brought me a sense of peace because they were right. I was not responsible for fixing Valerie's life anymore. She was a 42-year-old adult woman, fully capable of making her own choices and bearing the consequences. It was time for her to learn to walk on her own 2 feet, even if that meant stumbling 1,000 times before finally finding her balance. Forgiveness, not amnesia. September rolled in with gentle rains that coaxed my garden into blooming with renewed intensity. The coral roses were brighter than ever before. The lemon tree had produced its first small fruits, and I felt more alive than I had in decades. I had also started writing. Nothing serious, Just a journal where I jotted down my thoughts, recorded my daily experiences, and documented my discoveries about myself. Diane had suggested that I write my entire story, suggesting that perhaps it could resonate with other women trapped in similar situations. I was seriously considering it. One October afternoon, 6 months after that fateful night at the restaurant, I received a call from an unknown number. I normally didn't answer calls from numbers I didn't recognize, but something compelled me to pick up this time. It was Valerie's voice, but it wasn't the arrogant, manipulative Valerie I had known for so long. It was a broken, humble, almost unrecognizable voice. "Mom," she said, and that single word carried oceans of pain within it. "I know I have no right to call you. I know I don't deserve a minute of your time, but I need to tell you something. I need to apologize." I remained silent, waiting. "I've lost everything, Mom. My job, my marriage, my house, my dignity. And in the midst of all this darkness, I finally understood something. I understood what I did to you for years. I used you. I treated you like an object. I stole your peace, your money, your life. And I thought it was my right that because I was your daughter you owed me everything. But it wasn't like that. You didn't owe me anything and I owed you everything. And I never thanked you. I never valued you. I never truly saw you." I could hear her crying on the other end of the line, crying that sounded genuine, crying that came from a deep place of real remorse. "I'm not calling to ask you for money," she continued. "I'm not calling to ask you to rescue me. I'm calling to tell you I'm sorry. That I understand why you left. That I understand I destroyed our relationship with my own hands. And that if you never want to speak to me again, I'll understand. I deserve it." There was a long silence. My heart pounded in my chest. Part of me wanted to hang up. Part of me wanted to scream out all the pain I had bottled up over the years. But another part, a wiser part, recognized something important in her voice. I recognized the sound of someone who had finally hit rock bottom, someone who was finally ready to change. "Valerie," I said finally in a calm but firm voice, "I accept your apology and I forgive you. But forgiveness does not mean amnesia. It doesn't mean we will go back to the relationship we had before. That relationship was toxic and destructive. You used me and I allowed you to use me. We both failed. We both need to change." I paused, carefully choosing my next words. "If you truly want to rebuild some kind of relationship with me, it won't be like before. I am no longer your ATM. I am no longer your solution for everything. I am your mother, yes, but I am also a person with boundaries, with dignity, with the right to my own peace." "I understand," she whispered. "Is there any way we can start over, even slowly?" I thought about her question. I thought about everything I had experienced these past 6 months, my garden, my house, my peace. And I realized I was strong enough to give her a chance, but on my terms. "We can try," I told her. After that call, I established clear rules. Valerie could visit me, but only when I was ready. There would be no money involved in our relationship. No loans, no gifts, no financial rescues. If she wanted to rebuild a connection with me, it would have to be based on mutual respect, not economic transactions. I gave her the address of my new house in Charlotte and told her she could come to visit in 2 weeks. I needed that time to prepare emotionally, to strengthen my boundaries, to make sure I wouldn't fall back into old patterns. During those 2 weeks, I spoke a lot with Diane and Marcus about the situation. Diane was cautious. "Be careful, Lena. Manipulators know exactly what to say when they want something. Make sure her repentance is real, not just another strategy." Marcus was more optimistic. "People can change when they hit rock bottom. Give her a chance, but don't lower your guard. Keep your boundaries like steel walls." I prepared my house for Valerie's visit. Not as I would have before, trying to impress or please her. I simply cleaned, bought some groceries to prepare a simple lunch, and made sure I had tea and coffee on hand. I didn't want the visit to be tense, but I also didn't want to pretend everything was fine. This would be a real, honest conversation, perhaps uncomfortable but necessary. Valerie arrived on a Saturday morning by bus. She didn't have a car anymore. She had been forced to sell it. When I opened the door, I almost didn't recognize her. She had lost weight. Her clothes, though clean, were simple and old, none of the luxury she used to flaunt. Her hair was longer, without the expensive dye she always used. But the most impactful thing was her gaze. She no longer carried that arrogance. Her eyes showed something different. Humility, shame, genuine pain. "Hello, Mom," she said, her voice trembling. She didn't rush to hug me. She stood there waiting for my permission. That simple gesture spoke volumes. I took a step forward and hugged her. It wasn't the warm, unrestrained hug from before. It was cautious, protected, but it was a start. I invited her in. Valerie looked at my house with silent astonishment. It was small, modest, nothing compared to what she probably expected. But it was full of light, plants, and soft colors. There were paintings I had done myself on the walls, ceramic pots I had made in the workshop, and books piled up in a small library. It was a real home, not a soulless warehouse filled with expensive things. "It's beautiful, Mom," Valerie said, and her voice sounded sincere. "It feels peaceful." We sat in the living room. I prepared tea for both of us, and then we started talking, really talking. For the first time in decades, Valerie told me everything. How after that night at the restaurant, her life had crumbled piece by piece. How Derek had left her, blaming her for ruining their finances and reputation. How she lost her job when the story went viral. How she tried to ask the family for help and everyone turned their backs on her. How she was left alone in an apartment she couldn't afford, eating rice and beans because that was all her budget allowed. "I hit rock bottom, Mom," she said, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I was so angry at you at first. I blamed you for everything. I said you had abandoned me, that you had ruined my life. But one night, sitting in that empty apartment without electricity because I hadn't paid the bill, I finally saw it. I saw what had really happened. I ruined my own life. I used you for years. I publicly humiliated you. I created that debt monster, and you simply refused to continue being my victim." I listened without interrupting. Her pain was real. Her repentance seemed genuine. But I had learned to protect my peace. So when she finished speaking, I took a deep breath and told her my truth. "Valerie, for your entire life, I gave you everything you asked for. I sacrificed my dreams, my money, my peace of mind to ensure that you were okay. But in doing that, I did you a terrible harm. I never taught you the value of work. I never let you face the consequences of your decisions. I was always your safety net. And you learned that no matter what you did, I would always be there to rescue you. That wasn't love. That was negligence disguised as generosity." Valerie nodded, wiping her tears. "I know, and I'm so sorry, Mom. I'm sorry I treated you like an object. I'm sorry I wasted everything you gave me. I'm sorry I humiliated you at that restaurant. That night was the worst mistake of my life. I thought it would be funny, that everyone would laugh and you would pay as always. I never imagined you would say enough, but you should have done it years ago." "You're right," I admitted. "I should have set boundaries much sooner. But it's never too late to start. So, here are my terms if you want us to try to rebuild something. First, you will never ask me for money again. Not loaned, not gifted, not as an emergency. If you need financial help, you will look for a job. You will ask for a bank loan, but you won't come to me. Second, our meetings will be when I am ready, not when you need them. You will respect my space and my time. Third, if you ever disrespect me again, this door will close permanently. There will be no third chance." Valerie listened to every word carefully. When I finished, she nodded slowly. "I accept all your terms, Mom. I don't even deserve this opportunity, but I promise I'm going to change. I've already started. I got a job at a coffee shop. It doesn't pay much, but it's honest. I'm living with a coworker in a small room. I'm paying off my debts little by little. I'm learning to live with what I have. And for the first time in my life, I'm not waiting for someone else to solve my problems." Her words touched me, but I kept my guard high. Words were easy. Actions would be the true test. "I'm glad to hear that, Valerie, and I support you in your growth process, but that support will be emotional, not financial. I can listen to you. I can advise you. I can be your mother in the real sense of the word, but I will no longer be your savior." We spent the rest of the day talking. This time not about money or problems. We talked about books, about my garden, about her work at the coffee shop. I showed her my paintings and my ceramic pots. I told her about Diane, about Marcus, about my new life. Valerie listened with genuine interest, asking questions that showed she truly wanted to know me as a person, not just as a source of resources. When it was time for her to leave, I walked her to the bus station. Before she got on, she hugged me. Thank you, Mom, for not giving up on me, for teaching me the hardest but most important lesson of my life. I'm going to do better. Promise. I watched her leave with mixed feelings. Hope blended with caution, love mixed with protection. A garden of choice. In the following months, Valerie kept her word. She called me once a week just to talk. She told me about her job, about how she was learning to manage her money, about the low-cost therapy she had started. She never mentioned economic needs. She never asked for favors. Slowly, very slowly, we began to build something new. It wasn't the traditional mother-daughter relationship we had before. It was something different, more real, more honest, healthier. Meanwhile, my life continued to flourish. Marcus and I became officially involved. We didn't live together. We both valued our independence, but we spent a lot of time together. We had dinner at my house or his. We went to the movies. We walked through the historic downtown, holding hands like teenagers. It was a mature relationship without drama, without impossible demands. It was love in its purest form. Diane remained my rock, my confidant, the sister I chose, not the one I got by blood. Her house was my second home. Her family treated me as part of their own. At dinners, at celebrations, there was always a place for me. And I finally understood what it meant to have a real family. It wasn't about shared blood. It was about mutual respect, genuine support, and love without conditions or invoices. One December afternoon, almost a year after that night at the restaurant, I was in my garden watering the plants when Valerie called me. Mom, I wanted to tell you something. I got a better job at a small design agency. I'm finally going to be able to use my degree. Also, Derek and I have been talking. We're not getting back together, that's for sure. But we're trying to finish things civilly. Dividing the debt, signing the divorce papers without fighting. It's the right thing to do. I heard the pride in her voice. Not the arrogant pride from before, but genuine pride from someone who was finally taking control of her life. I'm so happy to hear that, Valerie. I'm proud of you. And I meant it, because watching my daughter finally grow up, finally mature, finally become a responsible adult was worth more than any amount of money I could have given her in the past. Thank you, Mom, for not giving up on me, for teaching me the hardest but most important lesson of my life. Losing you was the worst thing that ever happened to me, but it was also the best thing because it forced me to find myself. A year and a half after that night at the restaurant, my life was unrecognizable from what it had been. It was a spring afternoon when I decided to do something symbolic, something that marked the definitive closure of my old life and the celebration of the new. I bought seeds for a special rose at the nursery. The salesman explained that it was a variety called Queen Elizabeth, resilient, beautiful, blooming even in the most difficult conditions. Seemed perfect. Marcus came to help me plant it. We chose a special spot in my garden, right in front of my living room window where I could see it every morning. While he dug the hole, I prepared the soil with compost. We worked in silence, that comfortable silence that only exists between people who know each other deeply. When we finally placed the plant in its new home and covered it with soil, Marcus looked at me with that warm smile I had learned to love. This rose is going to grow strong, he said. Just like you. He hugged me, and we stood there in the middle of the garden I had built with my own hands, contemplating all the plants I had sown. Each one represented something. The herbs were my rediscovered pleasure and simplicity. The tomatoes growing in a corner were my self-sufficiency. The lemon tree was my recovered sweetness. And now this rose, the Queen Elizabeth, would be my symbol of total rebirth. Valerie came to visit that weekend. She came every 2 months now, always respectful, always grateful. Her transformation had been real and sustained. She had paid off almost all her debt. She worked full-time at the design agency and was building a portfolio she was proud of. She lived in a small, clean apartment decorated with things she had bought herself through her own effort. When she arrived and saw the newly planted rose, she smiled. "It's beautiful, Mom, like everything you've created here." We walked through the garden, and I showed her each plant, telling her the stories behind them. Valerie listened with genuine interest. She was no longer the arrogant woman who had humiliated me at that restaurant. She was someone completely different, someone who had been broken by her own actions and who had chosen to rebuild herself better than before. During the lunch we prepared together, Valerie asked me a question she had been avoiding for months. "Mom, will you ever be able to forgive me completely?" I took a moment to think about my answer because it was an important question that deserved an honest response. "I have already forgiven you, Valerie," I told her finally. "But forgiveness does not mean amnesia. I will always remember what happened. That memory is not resentment. It is wisdom. It reminds me to maintain my boundaries. It reminds me of my worth." Valerie nodded with tears in her eyes, but also with understanding on her face. After lunch, I told her something I had been considering. "I'm going to write a book," I said, "about my experience. I think there are many women like me trapped in toxic family relationships who need to hear that it's okay to say enough." Valerie looked at me with pride. "You should do it, Mom. Your story can help a lot of people and you can use my part of the story too." Uncensored. Those words moved me deeply. The following months were dedicated to finishing the manuscript. I wrote every morning after watering the plants. Diane and Marcus read every chapter and gave me feedback. I found a small publishing house that was interested in my story. The book resonated with more people than I imagined. Letters began pouring in from women telling me similar stories. All of them found something of themselves in my narrative. One of those letters touched me especially. It was from a 50-year-old woman who had read the book and had finally found the courage to leave her abusive husband. "Your story saved my life," she wrote. I cried reading that letter because if my pain had served to save even one person, then everything had been worth it. 2 years after that difficult night at the restaurant, I put together a small get-together in my backyard. Diane came with her husband. Marcus was there, of course, along with the friends from the book club. Valerie showed up with her new boyfriend, a really calm and respectful man. Even my cousin Avery drove a whole 4 hours just to be there. It wasn't really a party for any specific event. It was just a gathering of the people who truly mattered to me. We all cooked together. We laughed a lot. We shared stories with one another. And as the sun started to go down, we all circled around the Queen Elizabeth rose, which was now blooming in such a magnificent way. "I want to propose a toast," I announced as I raised my glass. "To second chances, to the bravery to say enough, to the gardens we rebuild from the ashes, and to the families we get to choose, not just the ones we're born into." Everyone raised their glasses in agreement. Valerie looked at me with tears welling up in her eyes and silently mouthed the words, "Thank you." Later that night, after everyone had gone home, and I was alone in my garden under the twinkling stars, I gently touched the delicate petals of the Queen Elizabeth rose. It had been 2 whole years since I had disappeared from that restaurant. 2 years since I had finally stopped being my family's personal ATM. And in those 2 years I had discovered something I never even knew was possible for me. Real honest-to-goodness peace. I didn't wake up in the mornings with a knot of anxiety in my stomach anymore, worrying about what new crisis I would have to somehow fix. I no longer based my self-worth on how much money I could give away. I had finally learned that my value was in who I was as a person, not in what I could provide for others. I looked around at my garden. Every single plant I had carefully sown was now thriving and growing strong. The lemon tree was heavy with ripe fruit. The herbs filled the air with their incredible fragrance. And the Queen Elizabeth rose glowed under the moonlight like a crown of victory. This garden was a perfect representation of my life. I had taken soil that had been depleted and exploited for years and years, and I had nurtured it and cared for it until finally something truly beautiful was able to grow and flourish. I went back inside my house and poured myself a final relaxing cup of tea. I settled into my favorite chair near the window. Outside, the wind softly rustled the leaves of my precious plants. Inside, I felt completely at peace, whole and free. I was no longer anyone's personal ATM. Now, I was simply Lena Dubois, a 71-year-old woman who had finally realized that saving yourself isn't selfish. It's survival. That saying no isn't cruel. It's an act of self-love. That sometimes disappearing is the only way to truly appear. And as the night enveloped my cozy little house in Charlotte, as my plants slept peacefully in the garden, eagerly awaiting the morning sun, I closed my eyes with a contented smile on my face. Because finally, after a lifetime of giving and giving until I had nothing left, I had learned the most important lesson of all. You simply cannot fill the cups of others if your own cup is completely broken. Now my peace is finally my own, and that is truly the only thing that matters in the end. Did you enjoy my story? And what city are you listening from? Let's connect in the comments section. If you appreciated the story, you can support me by sending a super thanks so I can keep creating more stories just like this one. Thank you so very much for your kind support. I am really looking forward to reading your comments on the story. On the screen you can now see 2 new life stories that I highly recommend you check out. There's so much more waiting for you on my channel. Please don't forget to subscribe. I'll see you in the next life story with love and respect.